What's going on, everyone? Wes here. In this video, we're going to build a simple chat server using Python and Docker. So let's get started. The first thing that we're going to want to do here is just make sure that Docker is installed on your development machine. So this is going to allow us to actually run the Docker container that we'll be building in this series. And so if you just head over to docker.com, and it looks like click on get started, and then just go ahead and download desktop for your particular platform. If you're running on Mac, as I will be in this series, once Docker desktop is started, you should see this icon here in your toolbar. Okay, so all right, so I'm going to open up a new terminal here, and I'm just going to go ahead and make a directory called simple chat. And we'll cd into simple chat. The first thing I'll do is just go ahead and get init in this directory so that we can track our changes in source control. So now I'd like to grab a gitignore file, and we can actually just go to GitHub to get a standard sort of boilerplate Python gitignore file. So you can see the file here. I can also show you just at github.com/github/gitignore. You can see that they have a collection for lots of different frameworks and languages. So we're just going to use the default Python gitignore that they have provided for us. And you can see that it's got some standard things like for setup tools, Django, Flask, and that sort of thing. So I'm just going to click on raw here, and we'll grab the URL. And then here we can just curl that down into a gitignore. So we can make sure that it came down properly. If we just cat out gitignore, and it looks like it worked. Okay, cool. So now what I'm going to do is make a setup.py file. And this is going to allow us to actually install the application that we're working on using pip. So we're going to use setup tools for that, which is built in to Python. And so we can say from setup tools import setup. And we'll use this built-in method find packages to resolve our packages. And this is just going to run as a script. So we're going to call this setup method from setup tools and give our application a name. So I'm just going to call it simple chat for now. And we'll give it a version of 0.0.1. And then we can specify the packages here. And we're just going to allow setup tools to find the packages for us. So that's all there is to this file. And then just because I feel like it's good practice, we're going to work in a virtual env here. And so what that's going to do is allow us to have a sort of virtual environment that isolates our dependencies to this particular project. So we could actually isolate our Python interpreter and all of the associated pip packages that we might install when we're working on this project here. So if you don't have virtual env installed already, you can just pip install virtual env. Once it is installed, we can actually use it. So we can say virtual env. So we'll specify the virtual environment name. We'll just call it env. And then we can specify that we'd like to use Python 3. And so on my machine, this is going to point to Python 3.7.3. As long as you're using Python 3.7 or probably Python 3.6, everything here should work as you see in the video. The next thing that I'm going to do is create a subdirectory called simple chat. And so this is actually going to be the installed package. It's going to be where our chat server file lives, as well as the test client and some settings. So in fact, if we just cd into the new subdirectory, I'm going to go ahead and make those 3 files. We'll make a client, a server, and some settings. And I'm actually going to make an __init file here. So the init file is going to tell Python that, hey, this directory is actually a module. So now that those are created, you should see them in your simple chat subdirectory. I'm going to cd up one directory. So in the root of our project, we should have our gitignore. This is where our actual Git repo is initialized. We have our env virtual environment. We have this setup.py file, and we have a simple chat subdirectory. I'm also going to make a directory here for our tests. Okay, so far so good. Let's cd back into simple chat, and let's go ahead and start working on our basic chat server. So the way that this is going to work is we're actually going to use sockets to basically connect different processes. Now, in theory, these sockets could be used for inter-process communication across the internet, across local networks, or even across processes on the same machine. The history of sockets is actually fairly interesting. It goes all the way back to ARPANET, I believe, and later you may have heard of like BSD sockets or Berkeley sockets, which was a specification that was implemented in early Unix, and so it goes back in the case of Berkeley sockets to the mid or early 80s. So you should be able to use sockets really on any modern operating system, and Python's socket library simply wraps an implementation of that socket protocol. So we're going to go ahead and import socket, and we'll also import a couple of constants here, AF inet and sock stream. So we'll see how these are used in a moment. This is an address family, and this is a type of socket. I'm also, while we're up here in imports, going to go ahead and import logging. And so this module is going to contain a class called chat server. And so it's going to be the responsibility of the server to accept and relay messages over sockets between clients. And so clients should be able to connect to the server, send the server messages, and the server will then relay those messages to all of the connected clients. So we'll have a very basic sort of group chat functionality. So we'll create an initializer here. And when we create a chat server, I think we just want to specify for now a host and a port, and we'll delegate the responsibility to the chat server to handle all of the underlying socket instantiation. So this guy's going to have a logger, and I'm just going to make a sort of private method here, if you will, to actually set up that logger. So we can go ahead and just actually make that method now. So let's have this method create a logging. For that, we can use the logging package, and we can call this getLogger. I never looked into it, but I always wondered why the getLogger method on the logging module is camel case instead of snake case. If anyone knows, leave a comment and let me know why that is the case for the built-in logging package in Python. Next, we'll go ahead and add a handler to this so that we can stream it to back to our terminal. So we'll add a stream handler. And then we'll set the default log level to logging.debug. Let's go ahead and return that logger. So now we have this instance of a logger that's on our chat instance. And we now need to set up a socket for our chat server to basically bind to. So what we can do is I'll create a self.sock instance variable, and we'll write another method called setupSocket here. Oops. And what we'll do is we'll pass host and port to this method that's used to set up our socket for chat server here. So let's go ahead and make that method. And actually, it occurs to me that this method and probably the socket method itself, both of these can be static methods. Okay, cool. So here's where we're actually going to be using Python's socket implementation. So let's store that in a sock variable. So this is socket, which is imported from socket. And what we'll do now is tell socket what type of socket that we'd like. So we're going to use this AF inet, which is basically internet address family, and sock stream to tell us that this is going to be a type of socket that accepts basically like a byte stream of data. So the AFINet just allows us to connect to a socket using a standard sort of internet protocol. What's going to allow us to actually provide the host and port format to connect. So now we can call sock.bind, and this actually expects a tuple here, so we can say host and port, and we can get rid of self since this is a static method. And now we just need that socket to listen for incoming connections, and those will be coming from our clients. We'll make sure that we can return that. Okay, cool. So now anytime we new up a server and we pass it a host and a port, we are going to set up a new socket which is going to be bound on this host and port, and we'll be listening for incoming connections. So how are we going to run this thing? Well, since we asked the question, we should make a method called run here perhaps for now. And let's think about what we want it to do. So we want this thing to accept incoming connections, and then we want it to relay any messages that are sent over the socket from its various clients to the rest of those connected clients. So if you and I are both connected to a chat room, I'm running a client, you're running a client, and we're both connected to the same server, when I send a message to the server, that server should then relay my message back to me and back to anyone else connected to the server, including your connection. For now, let's go ahead and we'll use our logger, and we'll log info to the terminal here, and we'll just say chat server is running. And this guy is going to be running as sort of an ongoing process. And so for now, we'll run this in a while true loop here. And so we need to use this accept method on our socket instance that the chat server is managing here. So accept is going to block and wait essentially for any incoming connections. So we can just put that in the comments here. Incoming connections. In fact, I'm going to put this above. And then what happens is when a connection occurs, this accept method is actually going to return a tuple containing a new socket object representing the connection and the address of the client that connected. So it returns a tuple containing a new socket object with the connection and address of the client basically on the other end. So since that will be returning that tuple here, we can just store those in like a connection and address variable. Okay, and so maybe when that happens, we can maybe debug this new connection. And I can just make this an F string. And maybe we'll just log out the address of the new connection that's made. So before we get too much further along here, how about we actually create a simple chat client that we can use to actually sort of test out the functionality so far of our chat server and at least see if we can get them communicating. So I'm going to go into client.py, and we'll go ahead and make a class chat client.